I had never seen so many people amputated, the direct victims of anti-personnel landmines. We are beginning to see really new technologies rapidly advancing, and those technologies are beginning to be weaponized.
This is Silent Killers, a podcast from Face to Face and the international campaign to ban landmines. In 1997, the world said enough and signed the Mine Ban Treaty, but landmines are still claiming lives in many countries around the world. In this series, we meet survivors, frontline workers, and global changemakers, all fighting for a mine-free world. From Cambodia to the Ukraine, the danger is real. The work is urgent, and the path to peace is possible. Step by step, and yet still under our feet. This is Silent Killers. Well, welcome back to Silent Killers. My name is David Peck, and as usual, we have another very special guest here with us today chatting about some pretty important things. Ms. Nakamitsu, who is the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs from the United Nations, is here with us today to chat a little further about this topic. I hope you've been following along with this conversation, and if you haven't, please go back and listen to some of the earlier interviews, and if you're starting here today, welcome. Sign up, subscribe, and share with your family, friends, and everyone else you know. That would be really helpful. We'd love that here. This is a partnership between Face to Face and the ICBL out of Geneva. Ms. Nakamitsu, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Thank you for having me.
It's such a pleasure to always talk with people who I would say, I'm going to say this out loud, who are at a very high level, who are interacting with people who are making decisions, who are giving speeches, who are writing policy, and you're shaking hands with these people and rubbing shoulders with these people. And I would love to know a little bit about your story and how you wound up here as this high representative at the United Nations. What was it that, I'm sure it wasn't one thing, but what was it that pulled you into this larger story?
Well, I didn't start my UN career in disarmament. So as such, I was never disarmament expert. But I joined the UN in 1989. And I started in humanitarian field, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. And my first assignment was in Ankara, Turkey. And during that time, of course, my assignment, there was the first Gulf War and the Kurdish refugee crisis. So throughout my career, I dealt with consequences of conflict and war, looking at wars and conflicts from different perspectives. First, humanitarian. Later, I worked in peacekeeping operations. I served in Bosnia, former Yugoslavia, Croatia, etc. And so I always was in a sort of direct observer and United Nations person trying to deal with the consequences, the symptoms and root causes of war and conflict. So I guess I can always say that, as such, I was able to look at the direct impact of various weapon systems on people. And that was a very important factor when 2017, Secretary General Guterres called me into his office and said, Izumi, what about disarmament? And I didn't know what he was talking about. So I said, what about disarmament? He said, oh, no, why don't you do disarmament? I said, what? I never dealt with disarmament issues. I don't know anything. I'm not an expert. He said to me, you don't have to be an expert yourself. You will have experts. But I want you to look at disarmament issues from broader perspectives and then place disarmament at the center of various UN's priority work and connect it so that we will be able to address issues related to disarmament and security from a more, holistic, comprehensive point of view. So that was my entry into disarmament. And indeed, it has been very useful that I dealt with those direct consequences on people of various weapon systems and wars and conflicts. How innocent civilians actually are the largest number of victims. And so, my interest in disarmament started actually with people at the center of discourse. And so I think it was a very useful background that I had working in the field from humanitarian, peacekeeping, and later, of course, development corporations, etc., because that gave me the real sort of understanding of why disarmament is a critical component of peace and security and development, and of course, human rights, humanitarian issues.
Ms. Nakamitsu, thank you for that. I really believe in the splash and ripple effect, the dropping of a pond, incremental change. You pull a thread here, it's connected to everywhere else. Do you have stories from your past as you were growing up, things that might stand out to you that pushed you in this direction of humanitarian work of, I've been working in international development for over 25 years, and I always am interested to know, why is it that you got into this sector and not the corporate sector?
That's a good question. Well, I think one reason is that I come from a family, generations of public servants. In my family, in my clan, I don't have anyone who actually went into private sector. All of my family members are, administrators, civil servants, teachers, and professors. So I think it was just a natural thing that I go into civil service or public service. And, that was a very natural environment, pushed me into this kind of a field. But why international? I was always interested in issues related to a bigger world. I was, a very careful listener of international news. And I studied at university in Japan. I studied international law. And my graduate thesis was about the international illegality of apartheid policy in South Africa. So I really went into, things that are happening around the world and how I will be able to make my own contribution, my efforts to make the world a little bit better place. So for me, it was a natural sort of progression. And of course, later when I started disarmament work, the fact that I grew up in Japan when I was young, in primary school, visiting, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the nuclear, atomic bomb memorial sites and the museums, etc. All these memories really was there in my background. This is wrong. These things should not happen in the future. It happened in the past, and then we have to make sure that it would never happen again. So all these things actually came together, and it's been a very, very useful background that I have. And the fact that I started my UN work in the field was also quite important. When I was younger, deployed to Bosnia, going into, IDP, internally displaced persons, collective centers, talking to old women who just got displaced from Srebrenica, talking about, how 3 generations of her family went to different wars. But the fact that people from around the world came to work in Bosnia, trying to serve these people, gave it just a little bit of a hope. She said that maybe future is a little bit of a better time ahead of us. So that was the first time really I understood the famous preamble of the UN Charter, saving, succeeding generations from scourge of war. So there was these experiences collectively really gave me the real meanings and real understandings. And all these things came together and since 2017 really been a helpful, very useful background to my disarmament work as well.
It's a remarkable story. And I love that you come from a family of public servants and of teachers. I think public servants and teachers should be, I think schools should be like palaces. And I think they should be some of the most highly paid people in the world. I really do believe that education is a part of we have to believe that, right? And when I had Lloyd Axworthy on Silent Killers recently, and he talked a lot about radical hope. And I love that you bring that up as well in such a complicated, divisive, messy world that we're living in currently. I think the idea of hope, and I hope we can continue to talk about that here in our conversation. You talked about root causes and direct impact, and I couldn't help but hear the gap between theory and practice. And here you are saying that one of the most important things for you is that you began in the field. Ms. Nakamitsu, you kind of can't go back once you've heard a personal story. Would you agree with that? Once you've met one of these women? once you've met a Cambodian landmine survivor face to face and shared a meal with them, everything changes, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, I always say when I speak to young people, of course, you have to study the theories. It's useful in generalizing and in applying those theories to different contexts. But at the same time, really understanding what is at stake in, not just with your head, but also with your heart, really gives a stronger motivation, if you will, a passion for the work that you do. And, the work that we do, it's a difficult one. And sometimes you get really deeply frustrated, angry, you get you have a sense of despair. But this passion and the belief, the motivations that you acquire through those individual connections, the stories, personal stories. Those are the things that will actually carry you continue work, this kind of work. So I think it's absolutely crucial that you have the connections to the real world, not just the UN conference rooms, if you will. Disarmament, the work that we do is supporting states and various stakeholders to develop important instruments, normative instruments, but that has to have a direct connection to the real world in the field.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. You mentioned frustration and despair even, and I feel the same. How do you get out of bed in the morning with a smile saying, my sleeves are rolled up, I'm ready. Could you talk a little bit about some of maybe the more rewarding aspects of the work that you do?
Yes, I'm actually quite an, optimist. If you're not, UN work is a difficult one to do. But what gives me hope in our work is that despite a really challenging, very difficult, very divisive world and dangerous world that we live in, there are people who want to work together to change course. And that sense of camaraderie and sense of alliance, believing that by joining forces, we can make a difference. And then, actually looking at the incremental, even if it is small and incremental, but real changes, making progress gives me every day hope and the optimism that, we can continue making a difference. So, you need to make sure that you also look at the positive side, not just looking at the difficulties. I always say that people are all different cultures, different religions, different beliefs, but we also have commonalities. We share common interests and finding that common interest is also one of the key elements for success as well.
It's good. Oh man, I so love that. I remember working with Stephen Lewis many years ago, who wrote Race Against Time, the great Canadian, and his son Avi Lewis, and connected to Naomi Klein and others. And I've done a few events with him over the years. And I remember him saying to me personally, could you imagine a world without the UN? And I think that is the sort of that optimistic edge, or at least that I kind of heard you chatting about there. And we're not going to have enough time in this conversation, I can tell already, but I'm just so thankful for you joining me here on Silent Killers today. Could you talk a little bit, Ms. Nakamitsu, about where you see the greatest maybe need or urgency with respect to disarmament? Is it about landmine clearance? Is it about victim assistance, education, public engagement? And so I'm sure it's all of those things, but do you have a focus, or do you think we globally need a better focus?
It's all of what you said, of course. It would be very difficult to pick one area of issues. I mean, on the nuclear field, I think the risk of nuclear weapon actually used is highest since the depths of the Cold War. So, we have to make sure that it would never happen. So that's absolutely a priority. On the humanitarian disarmament side, many of those principles and norms and the humanitarian disarmament instruments that we actually sort of took for granted that it's there and it will always be there, is now starting to really erode, starting to weaken. And that is a serious concern. It's a very urgent challenge that we need to really course correct, because At the UN, we of course talk about how important it is to prevent conflict and prevent wars. But if it doesn't happen, then at a minimum, civilians have to be protected. There are rules to fighting wars, right? And humanitarian disarmament instruments are made in order to make sure that civilians would not be victimized in wars. So, those instruments, including, and most importantly, obviously, the Ottawa Convention, Anti-Personnel Landmine Convention, I think that is a top priority. There is also another quite important issue of large explosive weapons being used in the residential, populated areas. That should not happen. So all these things are absolutely top priorities. And on top of everything, we are beginning to see really new technologies rapidly advancing. And those technologies are beginning to be weaponized. The consequences of that is still today a little bit unpredictable, unknown. It's not clear yet. But we know that if we have a day, and God forbid, when machines are actually making decisions to use lethal force and then take human lives, that is really a scary thought. So we have to make sure that that would not happen. So all of these things, top priority issues, subjects. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that public is aware of this. Public voices are heard that these things are not good. We can't let that happen. Young people be made aware and their voices are heard, and then they will actually be in the decision-making table, because this is really about the world that they live in, and they will be leading. So, all of those things, education is absolutely key. So you can see that everything that you just mentioned, priority, you can't say which one is the top. We have to do them all together. And it is, in my view, one of the critical issues for the entire world. It's not just for one nation or group of nations, but for the entire humanity. This is a very, very important work that we have to do urgently.
I think of some of the gaps, where obviously I suppose most of us who work in this sector think funding. We need more funding. What is it, $4.3 trillion to meet the Sustainable Development Goals? That's the number that's been floated recently. But it isn't just about money, right? It's about political will, and it's about morality. So, Ms. Nakamitsu, I think we could go outside of a boardroom, outside of a UN meeting, outside of a world, an NGO meeting, and individually, everyone would agree that disarmament is a good thing, that stockpile clearance is a good thing, that landmine clearance, victim assistance is a good thing. And yet, collectively, we seem to have so much trouble getting there. Can you put your finger on a few of the issues that might be helpful for some of our listeners?
You talked about the sustainable development, financing what we need. But at the same time, on the other side of the spectrum, the world last year, 2024, spent $2.7 trillion for military budget, military expenditure. And with the current trends continuing, it could actually go up to $6.7 trillion. I mean, it's a record high in history. And so
it's an astounding number.
Yes, absolutely. So there is, at the moment, an imbalance where the world is really looking to military security and neglecting or crowding out, if you will, other top priority challenges of the day, such as climate crisis, sustainable development, inequality issues. All these things are actually crowded out from the priority list. So what does that mean? I think at the moment, because of everything that's happening in the world, the policies, especially security policies, are really starting to be driven by fear or short-term considerations of, or how do we protect the border, our territory? And then we need to make sure that a broader or wider set of priorities and more balanced approaches will be brought into the policy debates and policy discussions. Do arms race dynamics really ensure our security? From the UN, our answer is no. military alone security policies will at some point have a backlash, because we will go into the sort of a vicious circle of additional security and threat perception in various parts of the world that are, in tense relationship with each other. So for us, more balanced security approach is a combination of course, appropriate self-defense capacities that to be combined with, of course, diplomacy, arms control, and disarmament measures, which are made, after all, as security instruments. We don't believe that disarmament is just utopian, idealistic discussions. They are made as security measures. So we need to we need to have a better combination of those various instruments, and then look at legitimate security concerns and address them more appropriately. So I think this short-term, immediate, fear-driven policymaking has to change, and important role of the civil society is to make sure that those considerations will be actually put to fore in the domestic political discussions. Is my country spending X amount of a defense budget? Is that the right amount? What about other priority issues which are also related to a top priority agenda of the people and the citizens? So the more transparency political debates about defense and security policies, I think, will be quite important. So all these things have to come together. It's a difficult, complex mix of issues, but the civil society and the public voices really will have to be absolutely at the core of this.
Yeah, that's remarkable. So is there a way that you feel that the UN might be able to do, not necessarily more, but might be able to, I don't know, co-create, collaborate, link metaphorical arms together more with civil society to, to keep this message in the forefront and to engage publicly. And I know that you're already, as an organization doing so much, and you individually. Any insight there?
Yes, I mean, we are trying, and then we are redoubling our efforts to that effect. I mean, the issue that I just talked about, the military expenditure, this is a result of the recent Secretary General's report on military expenditure, how it is impacting sustainable development goals. And this was at the request, this was written by the mandate given by member states. And the reason is that I think vast majority of member states actually feel that there is something wrong at the moment, and they want to find out how to course correct. So there are good number of people and member states, I would say vast majority of states in the world, who want to address those things. And the UN's role is to make sure that we give substantive advice and options on how to make sure that will be a possibility. And so, one of the things that we are really focusing on is that using those substantive reports and recommendations that we give, we need to make sure that there will be public debates being generated, of course, at the global level, at the United Nations, but also at the regional level, because the threat perceptions are all different depending on which regions, which countries you're coming from, and of course at the national level. And in all of those, I think the civil society voices are absolutely key, and expert analysis and voices are also quite important. So, we are trying to work with them. Yesterday, I had a large meeting, 2 hours, with the civil society representatives, and the hybrid access make it now possible for, civil society organizations in Cameroon, in South Africa, all these different places to participate in this kind of a wider a discussion platform. So we definitely want to enhance our efforts in this regard.
It's so good. I mean, I've been doing this for many years alongside of other work that I do, but for me, it's about the conversation and about planting those seeds and peeling back the layers, with further question and dialogue. And I'm so encouraged to hear that the UN is, supportive of that and getting the public involved. And it's not easy. We have to wrap here in a couple of minutes, unfortunately, but, you've talked about root causes. direct impact. And you brought up optimism as well, Ms. Nakamitsu. I would love to hear, what are you optimistic about, looking into the future over the next couple of years? Is it about the youthful involvement and engagement, or is it about changing the narrative? I'd love to hear more about what you have to say there.
Yeah, I mean, working with younger people definitely is one very important sources of hope that makes me also energized as well. I mean, a very concrete example of how I was very much inspired. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about anti-personnel mine ban convention. The first time that I ever really saw the impact of anti-personnel landmine was in Cambodia in 1991. I was at the time I was working for UNHCR, just coming out from Turkey, Iraq and Turkey at the end of, it was 92. At the end of 91, I came out from Turkey, Iraq, and then moved to Geneva, started to work for human resources in UNHCR. And in March of 92, I was sent to Cambodia, because there is as you know, ANTAC operation was starting, and the UNHCR was starting to have a repatriation operation of Cambodian refugees into Cambodia. So I was sent to Cambodia in the spring of 1992 for about a month to travel around the country to identify how many people, what kind of people we need to recruit for that operation. And I had never seen so many people amputated, the direct victims of anti-personnel landmines. It was a really huge shock to me. I went to visit Handicap International, different offices trying to help those victims, etc. And years later, I heard about this movement to create a treaty about this. I think at the time I was working in Bosnia. And then I said, no way. I mean, a couple of NGOs working together, the landmines everywhere, so many millions, and then it's just not going to happen. But it's great that these NGOs are getting together and then trying to voice their concerns. And then a few years later, it happened. So that was a real shock in a positive sense, right? These movements can really change the world, was what I learned from that movement. So I think the same thing or something similar can happen. These young people, and by the way, younger women, really voicing their concerns, getting together. Similar things happened, of course, with the TPNW, Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. That was the ICAN movements. Again, younger people getting together and then saying no to nuclear weapons. So I think believing in and actually witnessing some of those positive changes that were really driven by younger people who had the real belief that they can, if they work together, they can change the world for the better. That gives me hope and energy every day to come to work and face all these difficult challenges around the world.
It's amazing. And I am so sorry, at least from my perspective, that we don't have 2 or 3 more hours to have a conversation together. I'm so glad you brought up Cambodia. Maybe at some point down the road, we can talk more, because it's a place in the world that's taken a huge part of my heart and my life and my work. And I think it's that personal story, that face-to-face. And I love that you use the phrase belief and witness. And I think it's a remarkable thing. Ms. Nakamitsu, thank you so much for joining me here today on the show on Silent Killers. It's been a pleasure to have you, and what a great story. And and thank you for all the work that you're doing.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, there you have it. That was my interview with the High Representative for Disarmament Affairs from the UN. That's Ms. Nakamitsu. And I, again, just thrilled excited, encouraged, affirmed, but also challenged, and always feel like there's not enough time. We're just starting to peel back some of those layers. But, belief and hope, again, aligning with Lloyd Axworthy, an episode earlier. And if you haven't heard Lloyd's interview, please go back and check it out. It's Silent Killers. If you're even just joining us now, who knows? Make sure you go back and listen. You can get to it at the ICBL's website. That's icblcmc.org. You can also find Silent Killers on Apple and Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts, and you can check out the video interviews on YouTube as well. I don't know about you, but I am encouraged, and I love this notion of radical hope. It does seem to be a theme, and that young people and public engagement and education are, in fact, the way forward, and this sense of personal story, belief that you can make a difference, and then the witness, that bridging that gap between theory and practice. So many issues, so many things to talk about. I think the key is that we all step into these conversations with our sleeves rolled up, and I think we can do that, and many of us already are. Thanks for joining us here. The podcast is called Silent Killers, and my name is David